Hello, and welcome to ILEAD USA. The following brief presentation is one of a series that we hope will provide you with some basic background before you arrive at your first in-person session. We're making it available as a podcast so that you can refer back to it as necessary during the duration of your ILEAD USA experience. My name is Tom Dorst, and I participated in the first 2 years of ILEAD U in Illinois as an instructor. Based on experiences with past iLeaders, I've prepared this quick review of the basics of project planning. While becoming a great project planner is not a goal of ILEAD USA per se, we have learned that understanding the basics of project planning and using them proactively and consistently throughout ILEAD USA will pay dividends in the end. Using reliable methods of project planning is also useful because the ILEAD USA experience will probably be different from other projects in which you may have participated. You'll be working with people from multiple institutions, and some of them you may not even know very well. A shared understanding of how to construct your project can assist in team building and smooth the functioning of your team. You'll be learning new skills and new technologies as the program progresses, and incorporating them into your project can be stressful and challenging. Having a sound project planning framework to guide your team will be helpful. While ILEAD USA is a unique experience, the basics of conceiving, developing, refining, and realizing a project are probably familiar to you. So let's review them. So, what is a project? A project is a temporary endeavor with a defined beginning, middle, and end, undertaken to meet clearly articulated goals and objectives. The key here is that a good project is well defined and appropriately limited. A good project does not seek to solve all of the world's problems. Project planning begins by asking answerable questions that lead to the identification of a problem or problems that can be addressed in the time available and with the resources that you have available. In fact, project planning is really an ongoing and self-reinforcing conversation among team members and between team members and the community. The essence to good project planning is that you continually come back and ask new questions and test the definition of your problem, and then adjust the project as needed. Project planning is an organic process rather than an automatic or mechanical one. Projects typically are constrained by any number of factors: the time available, the number of staff that can be applied to it, the technology you have at hand or can learn, funding, and the ultimate deliverables are all reasonable factors that need to be taken into consideration. Constraints are not really necessarily a bad thing. They can sharpen focus, impose discipline, and foster creativity. Unlimited expectations are virtually impossible to meet. Your planning should aim to account for all of the constraints and develop strategies to control them. Formalized project planning is now taught in virtually every business school in the country, but is a topic of fairly recent vintage. Things like the Manhattan Project during World War II, the building of the interstate highway system, and the creation of huge suburban housing developments are good examples of why project planning has become so important. Rigorous and effective planning was required and still is required to satisfy the demands of constant review and accountability by government funders and private investors. There are lots of books and articles about the styles and methods of project planning, and if you need to know more, let your project mentor know, and they will work with the ILEAD U instructors to meet your team's specific needs. However, just to keep things in a little perspective, this is a simple schematic of one approach to project planning called the critical path method. The essential message here is that projects are dynamic, and planning them is an organic process. It is not a linear process. The arrows here indicate that the planning process constitutes a feedback loop, and that's the key to ultimate success. Flexibility and adaptability as you plan your project and refine it are your allies. One thing that this slide does not show is that in actual projects, these steps and activities will invariably overlap in time. In fact, you can and probably should be engaged in several of these activities simultaneously. Let's look at the steps of the project planning cycle in a little more detail. What's the big idea? What's the problem that needs solving? Who do we need to serve in a new and more effective way? These are all questions that you ask in the conceptualization phase. Your team may already have started this step, but remember, it will need continuous revision and refinement throughout the project. Give your concept room to grow and change. It will come into sharper focus at some point, but you shouldn't really try to be too prescriptive about it right now. Obviously, this is the heart of the matter. What steps need to be taken and in what order? What's our timeline? What technology should we consider? What skills do we need to acquire or strengthen? From whom do we need comment and critique about what we're doing, and when? Notice these are all questions used to spur conversations in the team. Ultimately, your project will need and have a demonstrable payoff. A mobile app, a community event, a new set of resources. It may evolve naturally from the project concept and the objectives, or you may have an aha moment somewhere along the way. The best advice here is be flexible. This is what all those arrows on the graphic are about. Project planning is all about keeping a lot of balls in the air at the same time. Monitoring your progress and communication within the team are critical in a program like ILEAD USA, where you won't see each other every day and need to share the work, leadership, and responsibility. The watchwords here are observe, discuss, and adapt. Remembering the definition of a project, your ILEAD U project will have an end. More about that in a few minutes, but you should begin thinking about and bringing the project to closure early in the planning process. As T.S. Eliot wrote, "In my beginning is my end, in my end is my beginning." This is a frequently overlooked aspect of project development. In fact, how will we know when we've succeeded should be among the first topics your team discusses after an initial concept is formulated. It's a question that can be returned to and should be returned to and refined throughout the program. You can use this type of discussion as a reality check throughout the project. Success in most projects is unlikely to be intuitively obvious. You should clearly identify what success will look like and what sort of measures you will use. I'm not advocating that you be timid about defining success. Like any Olympian, you should go for the gold. Once again, defining success is fundamentally about asking questions of yourself, your teammates, and whenever possible, the community you are hoping to serve through your project. You can organize your questions around a number of parameters. Here are some typical ones. Did we bring the project in on time? What does the schedule look like? Did we meet the budget? Did we have any cost overruns? Did whatever we built perform the way we thought it would? Is the outcome what the community expected? Organizational parameters of success are important and useful. However, your projects will also be judged successful by one or more audiences. How will they measure and compare things like acceptance and satisfaction? Is one of these more important than the other? How does what we learn help us focus and refine the project? I'm listing some parameters as examples. This is not an exhaustive list, and you may need or want to use a completely different. 2 points on this slide. One is to give you just a brief graphic summary of the value and importance of incorporating this discussion of success early in your planning. And second, to note that I created it quickly with the tools available in PowerPoint, rather than using some sort of fancier graphics program. It gets the point across well enough. The takeaway for your project here is not to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. This can often be a problem in projects that employ technology, especially when they are new to you. You are not going to fail in ILEAD USA. The program is constructed to give you support of every kind and at every stage. We wholeheartedly encourage you to take full advantage of all the help available. However, if you aren't willing to go a bridge too far, you aren't taking full advantage of this opportunity. That should be the whole point of doing a project. The library's regular and routine programs and services, supported by property taxes or student tuition, must have reliability, effectiveness, and efficiency as their hallmarks. ILEAD USA is one of those occasional opportunities where the envelope can be pushed. In other words, strive to define enough success for your projects to make them worth the special effort involved. Don't just plan for easy success. While failure shouldn't be a worry, good projects do involve risk. And here another maxim may apply. Let your reach exceed your grasp. Okay, let's consider risk for a minute. I'm going to use a rather formal definition. Risk is the difference between the expected and realized value of the result of a future event. One thing to notice about this is that risk is about uncertainty, not danger. The other thing, and the most important thing about this definition, is that it talks about a difference, the difference between an expected value and a realized value. It doesn't talk about something that's either positive or negative. That difference can represent downside risk or cost and or upside risk or benefit. When you're considering risk, when you're talking about risk in your teams, what you want to talk about is, do we let the difference between an expected and a realized potentially be very large, or are we trying to minimize that difference? That's what you're talking about in terms of managing risk. And the other thing to keep very much in mind is that risk is in the future, not in the past. It doesn't do any good to look back at some previous part of the project and say, boy, that was risky, or we shouldn't have taken that risk. That really doesn't do you any good in the project. So, since risk is not inherently a bad thing, you don't want to or need to avoid it entirely in your ILEAD USA project. What you want to do is understand that difference, understand what you're hoping will happen and then what does happen, and that's where your planning process comes in and you can adjust. You're trying to control risk and understand risk. You don't necessarily need to minimize it, and you certainly probably can't eliminate it. As you're probably already anticipating, I'm going to suggest that when you start to talk about risk in your project, in your team, that you do so through a series of questions. Where does the risk live in the project? Is it a high concept, really out there type of project? Are the technologies complex? Are they going to be hard for you to learn to implement in the project? Or are they going to be hard for people to use? Are they currently reliable? Communications is often an area where risk can live that we don't consider adequately. Who do we need to tell about the project? When do we need to tell them? Is it the right group of people at the right time? And then, of course, the delivery of the project, the rollout of the product, that where there can be significant risk. Will the website come up? Will there be problems with the mobile app? Things of that nature. In addition to deciding where the pieces of risk are in the design of the project, there's also then who will own that risk. Obviously, you as the project team are going to own a certain portion of the risk. It's got your name on it, as it were. The user, the audience for your project, how much risk do you want them to assume in this? And it's not necessarily a bad thing for the audience to assume some of the risk in using the project. That can make it exciting. Is there some sort of third party that bears risk? This would typically be a funder of a project. And then, of course, there can be shared risk. This is typically what you're looking to do, is balance risk in some sort of useful equilibrium. Closing out a project can mean several things. You can simply be done. When a house is finished, the carpenters and the plumbers and the electricians move on. A project can be operationalized and made part of some sort of regular service. This has, in fact, happened with some of the ILEAD projects in the past. Or one project can inform the creation of a new project. A piece of music can end with all the musicians hitting the same note together, or it can softly fade out, or the band can launch right into another song. But they don't start looking around and hoping someone will just call a halt, or just start getting up and leaving the stage when they think they've played enough. It's better to plan and control a project's conclusion. Think about it. Do it early in the process and adjust as the project proceeds. Know when to say goodbye. I will take that advice to heart and end the presentation with this wisdom from Mark Twain. If your team wants further assistance with project planning at any time during the ILEAD USA process, please talk to your mentor, and thanks for listening.